Hi, it's John at C Nation, and you are tuned into the Kush Journals. Join me and my occasional guests each weekday as we discuss all things cannabis in the great state of Utah. Hey, it's John at C Nation, and you are tuned in to the Kush Journals. Say hey, Jules.
Hey, Jules. Oh, hi, everyone.
Always the jokester. Hey, we've got a great interview lined up today, don't we?
Yes, we do.
So we captured this at the MJBizCon NEXT conference last week in New Orleans.
Which was amazing.
It was a blast. Definitely want to thank the gang at Grasslands for setting up this interview for us. Ricardo and Shauna and Chloe and everybody else there. Thanks. Morris Denton was awesome.
Yes.
He's the CEO of Compassionate Cultivators.
Which was amazing to talk to him.
It was a great story, wasn't it? He's a very humble person. I asked him right out of the gate if this getting this passed in Texas was a challenge or not. And he basically said it wasn't because of all the work that everybody before them did. Fair enough. I get that point. A lot of people before all of us have done a lot of work in this space, but he was so real and so down to earth. It was such a pleasure talking with him.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. So without further stalling for time, let's cut to that interview right now. Today, we have the great pleasure of being with Mr. Morris Denton, Compassionate Cultivation in, of all places, Texas. Was that a struggle?
I think that a lot of people struggled before I ever got involved. I think it's been a decade-long fight in Texas to see what happened in 2015. Right. And there's probably a handful of people and groups that deserve the credit for getting Senate Bill 339 passed, namely the Epilepsy Foundations of Texas, as well as, probably the most powerful and authentic voices anywhere in this world, mothers that have kids that suffer from different conditions that could benefit from cannabis. And so they rallied behind this and were able to get this legislation passed. And then guys like me basically kind of stepped in and said, all right, well, we're business guys, so let's see if we can carry the baton from here and do you guys a great service by making you proud of our efforts and not screwing it up. Because the only way that expansion occurs in Texas, John, is if we don't screw it up.
Yeah.
If we screw it up, then we go backwards. And so, we take a great deal of pride in representing the state of Texas by running our business through the values of the state of Texas: transparency, integrity, respect, etc. And that's who we are.
We have a ballot initiative in Utah in November. Medical cannabis, full-blown, real program. I want to ask you something that maybe you went through at your state house that they've gone through and that we've seen 100 times, and see if you can put maybe a face to this insanity. Real people with real conditions that are being treated with cannabis go before these legislatures that tell real stories, and sometimes heartbreaking stories, but real stories of the medical efficacy of how it's working for them, how they bailed from the pharmaceuticals because none of that worked, that made it worse for them. What do you think about, on a personal level or any level, when these people are so impassioned in front of lawmakers, only to see the lawmakers say, whatever, not this year? Did you suffer through a lot of that at your state house there, with just nobody really caring or feeling like no one cared?
What I experienced more than anything is kind of a canned response from legislators around, well, show me the science, and to me that's always kind of been a little bit of an empty cop-out response, because there is science, there is medical evidence, there is efficacy of this plant and its impact on people with a variety of different neurological conditions, and especially for people with intractable epilepsy or epilepsy. So the science is there. It's just do the lawmakers want to open up the aperture of their minds enough to be able to consider that science? And frankly, I think it kind of really goes back to, I mean, look, we're all prisoners of our own experiences.
Fair enough.
Right? And we're all kind of brought into this world and raised in this world, and our opinions and our insights are formed by that basis. And in Texas, we've got a lot of conservative legislators. And so the only way to be able to move the needle with them is one step at a time. And the approach that we're taking in Texas is a more reasoned, conservative, logical approach for expansion that's rooted in the reality of what's been approved, that gives the legislators something to say yes to instead of something easily to reject. Right? And if you combine that with the personal stories, and you combine that with those powerful testimonials, now all of a sudden you've got something that is not just compelling, not just science-based, but something that's overwhelmingly irrefutable, because you have your constituents that are suffering, they've been able to prove, you match that with science. How do you reject that?
How do you reject that?
Yeah.
And yet they do.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to beat that.
Well, I don't know that they do.
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, I don't know that they do, because it hasn't been until recently that we're starting to see real science.
That's a fair point.
And there's a difference between anecdotal evidence. Like, we have a chief medical officer. She's a board-certified pediatric neurologist and epileptologist, got her medical degree from Johns Hopkins. She has a clinic in Austin where she treats more than 2,000 patients, kids with primarily epilepsy.
Right.
And she's a hardcore medical-driven training, education. And until about a year ago, she was opposed to CBD because she hadn't seen the evidence, the true scientific evidence that she felt comfortable and confident enough in to where she could lend her voice to it. But now we're starting to see that. And with each passing day, more and more of this science that is credible in nature, that's clinical trials, done under the auspices of credible organizations, the more of those that start to percolate to the surface, the better we're going to be. Because you can roll out as many patients as you want. If all that evidence is anecdotal, it doesn't really lend the credence that a scientific study does.
No, it empowers people like me.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what we have to be aware of as people that are change agents, we have to be aware of the audience that we're dealing with.
Right.
The number one thing that when you're making okay, who's my audience? Well, when you're standing up in front of the legislature, you better know who those guys are and who those women are, and you got to know where they're coming from, and you got to know how to move the needle with them. And if you just get up there and repeat the same thing again and again, but you don't bring them what they really need, then you're going to get 4 years in a row of rejection.
That is really roughly what's happened on our home turf.
It's unfortunate, and I've always thought it's going to be a race to see who's last between Texas and Utah to do any kind of broad legalization, but I'm encouraged that Utah, you guys now have a ballot measure, because in Texas, the overwhelming percentage of the population is in favor of broad medical cannabis legalization.
Right.
And yet our legislature is so red and so conservative that they're somewhat digging their heels in. And at some point in time, the polling leads to votes.
Indeed.
And so for Utah and then Oklahoma, which is going to precede it on June 26th,
Right.
which is also a ballot initiative for a full medical program, everyone thinks it's going to pass in Oklahoma.
It's doing well.
It's doing real well. So, and then if you guys can parlay some of the success that we've had in Texas with epilepsy, which we're happy to share with you guys, because there is... we have about a 70 to 80% success rate with our patients with intractable epilepsy. Success as defined by a variety of things: a reduction in seizures, a reduction in the intensity of those seizures, an improvement in their cognitive capability and function, and for kids especially, a reduction in their behavioral issues, because kids with epilepsy tend to act out. They don't really know how to process what's happening to them, and so it leads to behavioral issues. We have 70 to 80% success across those variables, which is unbelievable. Right?
So how do you turn that so you can see that success? And anybody that has their eyes open has literally seen that. I mean, we've seen Sanjay Gupta's
Right.
special. I mean, we can see it literally happen. That is anecdotal. How do you take that, your 70-80%
Right.
success,
Right.
and actually turn that into something that's that's no longer anecdotal but factual medically?
So the good news in Texas is part of the program and how it was developed was that it puts the doctors in charge of the care of their patients. And in order for the doctor to re-up on a prescription in Texas, they have to enter observation information about each patient.
Okay.
And that observation information then is collected by the state on an anonymous basis and put into basically a data set that allows us to have proof on the treatment on a broad basis. So it's no longer just this doctor saying that it worked for little Tommy or that doctor saying it didn't work for Sue. It's now going into a data set that's being collected and then will be mined by the state of Texas to demonstrate the efficacy. So it may take a little bit of time, perhaps more time than what you guys need to get through your next ballot initiative, but in Texas, that's a unique program on a state basis.
Interesting. Jules, you had a question about the process, how a potential patient gets into the system and then started treating. And I guess I just asked it for you.
Asked, yeah.
But
That's right.
So how does that process work?
I'll answer Jules.
you do that, Jules. You do that.
So in Texas, it's again, good or bad, right or wrong, the system is that the first thing that has to happen is that a doctor has to get registered within the Compassionate Use Registry of Texas, which is called CURT. The doctor, in order to become registered, has to demonstrate certain board certifications and qualifications, meaning they either have to be a board-certified neurologist or epileptologist, or they need to have some percentage of their overall patient base be people with intractable epilepsy or with epilepsy. So the doctor has to come in. Then the doctor can write a prescription to one of their patients. That patient has to be under the active care of that doctor.
Okay.
That patient has to have tried and failed 2 other readily available forms of medication, right? So it's almost like this is the last resort for many of these patients. So then the doctor is able to write that prescription, but before that prescription becomes active, a second doctor who's also qualified and in the registry has to second that diagnosis and that prescription. They don't have to see the patient. They just have to see the chart, but then they can say, okay, yes, now the patient has an active prescription. So the patient then, or the doctor, someone calls us. We don't get notified that there's an active prescription. We have to be contacted. We get contacted, then we ask for some basic information from the patient or from the caregiver, last 5 of the social, date of birth, last name, etc., in order to validate that there's an active prescription. Then we can fill that prescription. So, that prescription will call for some, amount of milligrams over some period of time or milliliters over some period of time. And then we fill that order for them. And then the patient can either come into our dispensary in Austin or we deliver to them in the state of Texas, regardless of where they live. We have to ensure reasonable statewide delivery. Texas is a big state, and we're only allowed 1 vertically integrated facility. So we drive all over the state. We have a Prius. That's one of our delivery vehicles that we purchased new in February, mid-February, and it now has more than 23,000 miles on it.
Wow.
Just to give you an idea of how much we have to travel around the state. So yeah, that's the mechanics of how it works.
Do you have a handoff system? One of your drivers takes it as far as here, and another driver picks.
We can be, as long as we don't lose chain of control, and as long as everyone that has that chain of control is a Texas Compassionate Use Program license holder, and then as long as the vehicle that they're transporting that product in has been approved by the state and has the proper safe, proper tracking, all that information, there's lots of compliance hurdles that we have to leap through in order to operate within Texas.
So you are that single vertical license holder, is that correct?
There are three license holders in Texas. We're one of those 3. But yeah, we own. So for us, part of the blessing and the curse is that it's a vertically integrated market in Texas, which requires seed to sale all under one roof. The curse for us is the enormous capital requirements in order to build the facility that can do a cultivation and do it well, and then go from there all the way through the extraction, the refining, the processing, the testing, the packaging, and then the dispensing and delivery. The capital requirements for us to produce the facility that we wanted to have in place was significant. We're talking about multiple millions of dollars in our facility, multiple millions of dollars in our equipment in our facility. And so that's the curse. The blessing is that we own 100% of that, and therefore we can deliver, we can guarantee with assurance that the medicine that we produce is of the highest quality and it's consistent from bottle to bottle, batch to batch. Because of the process that we take, we know with absolute proof that the feedstock that we're growing is grown without pesticides. We test that multiple times through the process. We probably test the plants as they grow every week, every other week. Then we have a hydrocarbon-free extraction process where there's no chemicals that are used. We test it at every step function throughout the extraction and refining. We have a flash chromatograph system that allows us to identify and isolate on a molecular level 100% of the oil that we produce, which means we hit extraordinarily consistent variables from a percent by weight concentration of CBD and THC that is superior to pharmaceutical grade. Pharmaceutical grade has a variable of plus or minus 10%. We hold ourselves at plus or minus 5%. Mm-hmm. And then we test it to ensure that there's no residual solvents, pesticides, metals, microbials, any of that before it ever leaves our facility.
So what are the delivery methods that you can currently provide your oil to consumers? Vape?
No, right now it's just a sublingual tincture.
Sublingual, gotcha.
But we're coming out with suppositories,
okay.
And we're going to be coming out with vapes, and we're working on something else that should be really cool.
Do your state laws allow you some leeway within how to deliver that?
It does.
Nice.
It does, as long as it's not smokable.
Fair enough.
But from a medical community's perspective, there's the state regulations that you have to adhere to, and then you've got to think about what's in the best interest of the medical community, because we are a medical company, right? And so what we're not trying to do is perpetuate an old school way of delivering medicine. We're sitting down we hold focus groups with neurologists, and we say, tell us what works, what doesn't work. And one of the things that we've learned early in the process is that if you introduce the liver into the processing of this medicine, it can change the dynamic function of the medicine and its impact on patients. So we try to use a form of delivery that doesn't use the liver and its processing. So something that gets into the bloodstream sooner than later.
I'm sorry. You were talking about pesticides and all that. If you do find pesticide mold in your cannabis, then is there a way to get that out of your cannabis? Do you have to start all fresh again, or what's that process?
Well, we haven't discovered any yet, so knock on wood. Our facility's brand new. I mean, we built it from the ground up, so I don't think that we're going to have, it's not like we're pitching our tent inside a 50-year-old warehouse, somewhere that could have who knows what kind of percolating from who knows where. But we have the ability to go do regression analysis and figure out exactly where that came from. We have a very barcode-driven system that allows us to track from plant all the way through to medicine. So if a single plant comes up with something, then we know where that came from. Okay. We can go back and we'll just get rid of all that batch.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So you have to get rid of it.
For the purposes of our patients, we'll get rid of that
good.
stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you might as well be the Dallas Cowboys, Morris. Millions of Texans are betting on you, for a fact. California may get all the action. You are the second largest state in the nation. Millions of people are betting on your success there. I'm certain of it. Thank you very much for your time.
Appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Nice meeting you guys.
You too as well.
All right.
Awesome interview. Didn't we say dude was down to earth?
Yes, he was.
Morris Denton, thank you so much for your time. Listeners in Texas, now you know what it takes to be part of the medical cannabis program in Texas. It's thorough. It's extensive. They are a medical company. They go through medical protocols and procedures here. This isn't some fly-by-night operation. So again, everybody involved making this happen, You included, Jules. Thank you very much.
Bye.
The Kush Journals is a copyrighted broadcast of the South American Gold Corporation. We appreciate your likes and shares on social media, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.